Dear friend, pull up a chair and pour yourself some coffee. This is a story about two people who found each other when neither one was looking. About cornbread shared in hard times and kindness given without expecting anything back. My grandmother would have called it providence. I reckon she was right. There is a particular kind of silence that settles over a place when hope has packed its bags and left. Most folks my age know that silence. We have met it at hospital bedsides, at graveyards, at kitchen tables where bad news was delivered over cold coffee. Lenora Hadwell knew it too. Though she was young, yet she had grown up with it in the cramped boarding house rooms of St. Louis, in the space between her mother's labored breaths during those final months. But standing on the weathered platform of Thornfield Station, watching the train shrink to a dark speck against the amber horizon, she discovered a new variety of quiet altogether. This was the silence of being completely and utterly alone in a land she did not know, waiting for a man she had never met, clutching a letter full of promises that now felt thin as the paper they were written on. September the 14th, 1882. She had counted the days on the train like a child counting down to Christmas. And now here she stood with one battered valise at her feet and 47 words folded in her pocket, and nobody coming to claim her. The station master squinted at the letter like it might bite him. His name was Harlan Jessup, though she would not learn that until later. His fingers were stained with tobacco nails, cracked and dirty from years of handling freight and mail in this forgotten corner of the territory. Drummond, you say? He turned the paper over, held it up to the fading light. Silas Drummond. That is what it says. Lenora kept her voice steady. She had learned young that showing weakness was like bleeding in front of wolves. It only made things worse. He was supposed to meet me here. The smell of cold smoke hung in the air, sharp and acrid, mixing with the red dust that coated everything. The locomotive's whistle echoed somewhere down the valley, growing fainter with each passing second. Metal creaked as the tracks settled in the afternoon heat. Harlan Jessup scratched his jaw. Gray stubble rasped against his palm like sandpaper. Well, ma'am, I know who Silas Drummond is. Everybody in these parts knows the Drummond name. Owns Star Ranch, biggest spread between here and the territorial line. Lenora's heart lifted. Then it sank again when she saw his face. But I have not seen nobody from Star Ranch come through today. Not yesterday neither. He handed the letter back, and something in his eyes looked almost like pity. Then he added quieter now, almost to himself. Hope this time is different. The words landed strange. Lenora caught them the way you catch a stone thrown at you from the dark. You feel the sting before you understand what hit you. This time, what do you mean this time? Harlan Jessup shifted his weight, looked at his boots, looked at the horizon where the train had vanished, looked everywhere except at her face. It is not my place, ma'am. I have said too much already. Could be he just got held up. Ranch work does not keep a schedule. Could be tomorrow. Lenora unfolded the letter again. Read the date for the 100th time. September 14th. She pulled her mother's small brass watch from her pocket, the one keepsake she would never sell, no matter how hungry she got. The face was yellowed with age, but still keeping perfect time. It had belonged to her grandmother before that passed down through hands that had wound it every night before bed, right up until those hands grew too weak to turn the stem. September the 14th. She was sure. How far is it to town? Harlan blinked. Beg pardon. The town. How far Crestwood is about 10 miles west. He gestured vaguely toward where the sun was bleeding into the hills. But ma'am, it will be dark in 2 hours, and that road is not safe for a woman alone. Is there a shortcut? His eyebrows climbed toward his hat. He studied her for a long moment, this thin woman in her faded blue calico dress, the fabric washed so many times it had gone soft as old paper. Dust already settling in the creases of her face. One battered valise at her feet, containing everything she owned in the world. Whatever he saw made him sigh. There is a path through Saddleback Canyon. Cuts about 3 miles off the journey. He pointed northwest toward a gap in the low hills. Follow the creek bed till you see a split rock. Looks like a broken tooth. Bear left there, but I would not recommend it. Thank you kindly. She picked up her valise. The leather handle was worn smooth from her mother's hands, then her own. Inside, it held 2 dresses, one wool shawl, her mother's herb journal, with its pressed flowers and careful notes written in fading ink, and a tin-type photograph too faded to make out the faces anymore. That was the whole of Lenora Hadwell. Everything she was, and everything she had packed into one bag, light enough to carry with one hand. Ma'am Harlan's voice stopped her at the edge of the platform. You sure about this? Next train comes through Thursday. You could wait here. Send word to the ranch. I have done enough waiting, I reckon. She stepped off the platform onto the packed dirt road. The ground was hard and red, cracked like old pottery. The smell of sage and dry grass filled her nose, strange scents, nothing like the soot and river smell of St. Louis. Somewhere in the distance a hawk screamed high and lonely against the empty sky. Lenora touched the watch in her pocket, felt the familiar weight of it against her hip. Keep moving forward, Lenora girl. Her mother used to say that. The Lord helps those who help themselves. She squared her shoulders and started walking. The canyon swallowed sound the way a well swallows stones. Lenora had been walking for nearly an hour. The walls of Saddleback rose on either side, not tall but steep enough to block the wind and trap the heat of the dying day. Sweat trickled down her back, plastering her dress to her skin. The valise grew heavier with every step. She had not passed another soul. No wagons, no riders, nothing but the scrub brush and the red rock and the distant chatter of the creek the station master had mentioned. What kind of man does not come to meet his bride? She had asked herself that question 100 times since stepping off the train. The letter had been so careful, so precise. She had read it until she could recite it from memory. Dear Miss Hadwell, I am a man of few words and fewer graces, but I am honest and I will be good to you. The West is hard country, but there is beauty here if you know where to look. I have land, a sturdy house, and need of a companion. If you are willing to take a chance on a stranger, I will meet you at Thornfield Station on September the 14th. Respectfully, yours, S. Drummond. 47 words. She had staked her whole life on 47 words. Foolish girl, whispered a voice that sounded like her mother, but sharper and meaner. The voice of fever and pain. What did you expect? Lenora stopped walking, pressed her palm against the canyon wall to steady herself. The rock was warm from the sun, rough against her skin. She could feel her heartbeat in her fingertips. She closed her eyes, drew a breath, let it out slow. I am not foolish, she told the voice. I am brave. There is a difference. She opened her eyes and kept walking. The horse appeared around the bend like a ghost. Lenora froze. Her hand tightened on the valise handle. Not that it would do much good as a weapon, but a body has to hold on to something. There was no rider. The horse, a tall chestnut with a white blaze on its forehead, stood in the middle of the path with reins trailing in the dust. It watched her with large liquid eyes, ears pricked forward. Dried foam crusted its neck. Wherever it had come from, it had been running hard. Easy, Lenora murmured, stepping closer. Easy now. The horse snorted, but did not bolt. Its flank twitched when she reached for the reins. That is when she saw the blood. Dark stains on the saddle, smeared along the horse's right side. Too much to be from a scratch or a scrape. Lenora's stomach dropped. Her fingers brushed the saddle leather and she felt something else. Letters carved into the cantle, worn smooth by years of use, but still readable. 2 letters, S and D. She did not know what they meant. Not yet. But she traced them with her fingertip the way a person touches something that matters before they understand why. She followed the trail of disturbed earth with her eyes. The scuff marks in the dust. The displaced stones. They led around a tumble of boulders toward a section of the canyon wall where fresh rockfall had spilled across the path. Walk away, said the sensible voice in her head. Get on the horse. Ride to town. Find help. But her mother's voice, the real one, the kind one, said something different. When you see someone in need, Lenora girl, you do not walk past. That is not who we are. Her feet were already moving. The rocks were the color of dried blood in the fading light. Some were small as fists, others large as barrels. They had come down from the canyon rim recently. She could see the fresh scar on the wall above pale stone against the weathered red. She climbed over the first boulder, then the second, and stopped. A hand jutted out from beneath a slab of granite. Fingers curled toward the sky, motionless. A man's hand, broad palm, calloused fingers, a simple silver ring on the third finger, catching the last of the light. Lenora dropped her valise. She scrambled over the remaining rocks, heedless of the sharp edges tearing at her dress and cutting into her palms. The man lay on his side, half buried under the slide. His face was turned away from her, but she could see the rise and fall of his chest. Shallow, labored, but there, alive. He was alive. Mister. She knelt beside him, hands hovering. Mister, can you hear me? No response. His hat had fallen somewhere in the slide, dark hair matted with blood and dust. A deep gash across his forehead still seeping. His left leg was pinned under a rock too heavy for her to move alone. The smaller rocks came away first. Lenora's fingernails split against the granite. She did not stop. Each stone she pulled free revealed more of the man beneath. His shoulder, the curve of his back, the torn fabric of what had once been a good wool shirt. The slab pinning his leg was the real problem. Flat and heavy, wedged at an angle against a larger boulder. She braced her shoulder against it, pushed. Her boots scraped against loose gravel. The rock shifted barely an inch. Not enough. She repositioned herself, dug her heels into the dirt, pushed again harder this time until her arms shook and spots danced at the edges of her vision. The canyon walls seemed to lean in closer. The slab scraped sideways. His leg came free. She collapsed against the boulder chest, heaving. Her hands were raw, bleeding in places. The copper smell of her own blood, mixed with his, mixed with the dust, mixed with the faint sage on the evening breeze. The man's eyes opened. Gray. Pale gray, like winter sky before snow. They fixed on her face, unfocused, struggling to make sense of what they saw. His lips moved. No sound came out. Lenora reached for the canteen on the horse's saddle. Battered leather worn smooth with use. She unscrewed the cap, lifted his head with one hand, and tipped a small amount against his mouth. He swallowed, coughed, swallowed again. "Who are you?" he rasped. "Does not matter right now." She examined his leg in the dying light. Swollen, already purpling at the ankle, but the bone had not broken through the skin. Small mercies. The gash on his forehead was worse than she had first thought, deep enough to show white beneath the red. It needed cleaning, stitching, things she could not do here in the failing dark. "There is a cabin." His voice was barely a whisper now. "Half-mile. Follow the creek." Then his eyes rolled back, and he went limp in her arms. Lenora looked at the horse, looked at the unconscious stranger, looked at the last sliver of sun vanishing behind the canyon rim. Half a mile in the dark with a man twice her weight who might not live till morning. Lord, she prayed silently, I do not know if I am doing the right thing, but I cannot leave him here to die. Please give me strength. Getting him onto the horse nearly broke her. She hooked her arms under his shoulders, pulled. His boots dragged furrows in the dirt, leaving dark trails in the fading light. Dead weight. That is what folks call it. Now she understood why. Every muscle in her back screamed. Her knees buckled twice. But somehow, and she would never quite remember how he ended up draped across the saddle like a sack of grain. She took the reins and started walking. One step, then another. The creek bed stretched ahead, pale stones glowing faintly in the last purple light of evening. The cabin appeared between one blink and the next. A dark shape hunched against the hillside. No smoke from the chimney. No light in the windows. Abandoned just as he had said. She pushed open the door. The hinges shrieked. The smell hit her first. Old wood mouse droppings, something musty and closed in. Beneath that, the faint char of a long dead fire. She found a candle stub on the mantel. Matches beside it, the box damp but not ruined. The flame sputtered to life, throwing shadows across the single room. A stone fireplace. A wooden cot with a straw mattress. A table. 2 chairs. An iron pot hanging from a hook over the cold hearth. It smelled like a place that had been forgotten. But it had walls. It had a roof. It would have to do. The fever peaked somewhere in the deep hours of the night. Lenora lost track of time. She only knew the rhythm. Check his forehead. Wring out the cloth. Press it against his burning skin. Again. And again. She had carried water from the creek in the copper pot, built a fire from dry sticks stacked beside the hearth, torn strips from her petticoat for bandages. She had gone out to the creek bank with a candle and gathered mugwort in thick clumps near the water's edge, its leaves soft and silvery in the flickering light. Yarrow, too, its flat white flower heads nodding in the darkness. She crushed the mugwort leaves in a wooden bowl until they released their sharp, bitter smell, the smell of her mother's kitchen of childhood, of being safe and cared for. She packed the poultice against his wound, bound it with strips of cotton, brewed yarrow tea, and tipped it past his cracked lips, while his body shook with chills. His skin burned under her palm. He muttered words she could not understand. Names, maybe. Once he grabbed her wrist with startling strength, his eyes open, but seeing something far away. I am here. Lenora said, though she did not know why. I am here. His grip loosened. She changed the poultice, fed the fire when it burned low. The darkness outside the window shifted from black to gray, to the pale pink of approaching dawn. And slowly, so slowly, she almost did not notice his breathing steadied. His skin cooled beneath her hand. The trembling stopped. Lenora let out a breath she had not known she was holding. He woke with the first true light of morning. Lenora was dozing against the cot, her neck bent at an angle that would ache for days. His voice jerked her upright. "Where am I safe?" She reached for the water. "A cabin by the creek. You told me about it before you passed out." He took the cup with shaking hands, drank. His gray eyes moved around the room, taking in the fire, the bandages, the strips of torn petticoat drying on the hearthstones, the crushed herbs in the wooden bowl, the copper pot still warm by the coals. "You did all this?" The question did not need an answer. He studied her face for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, confusion giving way to something harder to read. "Who are you?" "Someone who was walking through that canyon." She took the empty cup from his hands. "Your turn. Who are you?" The pause lasted a beat too long. "Nate," he said finally. "Name is Nate." Lenora watched his eyes when he said it, watched the way they slid sideways just for a heartbeat before meeting hers again. Her mother had always said Lenora had a gift for reading faces, for knowing when someone was telling the truth and when they were selling snake oil. This man, this Nate, was hiding something. She did not know what. Did not know why a wounded stranger in the middle of nowhere would have reason to lie about something as simple as his own name. But she knew one thing for certain. He was not telling her the whole truth. She turned away to tend the fire. Behind her, she heard him shift on the cot, heard the faint, metallic sound of something sliding against fabric. And if she had turned around in that moment, she would have seen him pull the silver ring from his finger, the ring she had noticed in the canyon, the one with letters carved on the inside band, and slip it deep into his coat pocket, where she would not see it again. But Lenora did not turn around. Not yet. She had time. And the truth, as her mother used to say, has a way of working itself free. Like a splinter. The deeper it goes, the harder the body pushes it back toward the light. The cornbread had gone stale 3 days ago. Lenora unwrapped it from the cotton cloth, the same cloth her mother had used for Sunday baking, still carrying the faint ghost of her kitchen, even after all these miles. The edges crumbled under her fingers, dry and yellow-brown. She had been rationing the squares since St. Louis, one small piece each morning, making them last. Now only 2 remained, and her stomach had been hollow since yesterday. She thought of her mother standing at the old cast-iron stove, mixing cornmeal and buttermilk in the chipped blue bowl. The smell of it baking had filled their tiny rooms every Sunday afternoon, warm and sweet and golden. The one luxury they allowed themselves when the week had been hard and the money thin. Which was most weeks. Which was most money. Always share what you have, Lenora, girl. Her mother's voice clear as Sunday church bells, even now, even here, 1,000 miles from that kitchen and that stove and that life. The Lord sees what we do when nobody is watching. Lenora broke the larger piece in half, then in half again, weighed the portions in her palms. The man on the cot watched her with those gray eyes. He had been awake for 2 hours now, propped against the wall with his bandaged legs stretched out before him. He had not complained, had not asked for food or water beyond what she offered, just watched. She crossed the cabin, her boots scuffing against the packed dirt floor, and placed the larger portion in his hand. He looked down at it, looked back up at her. The cornbread sat in his palm, like something he did not quite know what to do with, like something precious, like something no one had put in his hand in a very long time without wanting something back. "Eat," Lenora said. "You need the strength more than I do. What about you? I have got mine." She returned to her spot by the fire, settled onto the floor with her back against the warm hearthstone. The cornbread was dry in her mouth, crumbly. The sweetness faded to almost nothing. She chewed slowly, making it last. Each swallow landed in her empty stomach like a pebble in a dry well. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackle of the fire and the distant murmur of the creek. A mockingbird called outside its song, bright and insistent through the gaps in the cabin walls. Nate ate slowly, methodically. When he finished, he brushed the crumbs from his fingers and fixed his eyes on her face, but he did not speak right away. He just sat there looking at the place where the cornbread had been in his hand, then looking at her, then looking away toward the window where morning light fell in a golden slant across the floor. Lenora reached into her valise and pulled out the cloth bag of dried apples. 6 left. She counted them twice to make certain, then divided them. 3 and 3. She crossed to the cot and dropped 3 apples into his palm. The dried fruit was brown and wrinkled, but still good. Sweetness concentrated by the drying, a taste of last autumn's orchards preserved through winter and spring, and the long, rattling journey west. "You were walking through that canyon alone." His voice was careful. Not a question exactly, but not far from one either. Lenora bit into an apple. "I was supposed to be met at Thornfield Station. Nobody came. Met by who? A man named Drummond." She kept her eyes on the flames. "Silas Drummond. I answered an advertisement in a St. Louis paper." He wrote back. 3 letters, then a train ticket. The apple turned dry in her mouth. She forced herself to swallow. And he did not come. No. The fire popped. Sparks spiraled up toward the chimney, orange and gold against the dark stone. Lenora watched them rise and die. The station master said, "This Drummond owns the biggest ranch in these parts. Star Ranch, he called it." Something changed in Nate's face. A tightening around the eyes. A stillness that had not been there a moment before. Like a man who has just heard a sound in the dark and is holding his breath to listen. "I have heard of it. Then you know more than I do." Lenora bit into another apple, chewed, swallowed. "All I know is 47 words in a letter." Turns out that was not much to stake a life on. Nate was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped lower, careful in a different way. "What were you hoping for from this man? This Drummond?" Lenora stared at the fire. The flames moved and shifted, painting shapes on the hearthstone that appeared and vanished before she could name them. A roof over my head. 4 walls. A place where I belonged. That is all. He watched her. She could feel it, the weight of his attention on the side of her face, steady and searching. Not money, not security. When you are drowning, you do not ask whether the rope is made of silk or hemp. You grab hold and hang on. The silence that followed was different from the ones that came before. Heavier, loaded with something she could not see but could feel pressing against the walls of the cabin like weather building on the other side of the mountains. Nate turned the dried apples over in his hand. His jaw tightened, just slightly, a movement so small she would have missed it if she had not been watching. Then he ate the apples one by one, looking at nothing, saying nothing, and whatever was happening behind those gray eyes stayed locked away, where she could not reach it. Night came on slow. Lenora fed the fire, checked the bandages, brewed another cup of yarrow tea. The routine was becoming familiar now. The rhythm of tending. Check his forehead for fever. Change the poultice, clean the wound, wrap it fresh. She moved through the motions the way her mother had taught her hands steady, even when her mind was not. She was settling into her spot near the hearth, pulling the thin blanket up to her chin when she heard it. Not a sound exactly, more like the shape of sound. A whisper so quiet it could have been the wind through the cabin walls, or the creek shifting in its bed, or nothing at all. She held still, kept her breathing slow and even, closed her eyes to slits. Nate was sitting up on the cot. She could see him in the faint glow of the dying fire, his back against the wall, his hands clasped in his lap, knuckles white, shoulders rigid with the posture of a man carrying something too heavy to set down and too important to drop. His lips moved, should have told her. The words were barely there, shapes of breath more than sound. She does not know. His head turned toward her. Lenora held her breath, prayed the dim light was not bright enough to give her away. He looked at her for a long moment. She could not read his expression, could not tell whether he knew she was awake. Then he turned back to the wall. His shoulders rose and fell with something that might have been a sigh or might have been something closer to grief. Lenora waited until his breathing changed, until she was sure he had drifted back into sleep. Then she opened her eyes fully, stared at the ceiling where firelight made patterns through the smoke. She does not know. Know what? What was this man hiding? What burden was he carrying that kept him awake in the small hours, whispering confessions to the empty air? The questions turned in her mind like a wheel on an axle, going round and round, but arriving nowhere. The next morning brought something unexpected. Lenora was outside gathering mugwort near the creek when she heard it. Hoofbeats. Not one horse, but two moving at a steady trot along the ridge above the canyon. She straightened, shielding her eyes against the morning sun. Two riders appeared on the skyline, dark shapes against the bright sky. They stopped. One of them raised a hand to his brow and looked down toward the creek, toward the cabin, toward her. Lenora. Nate's voice came sharp from the cabin doorway. Get inside. Now. She had never heard him use that tone, not when the fever had him gripping her wrist in delirium, not when the pain in his leg made him bite through his lip rather than cry out. This was different. This was fear. She moved toward the cabin without arguing. Something in his voice did not allow for argument. When she reached the door, he pulled her inside and pressed himself flat against the wall beside the window. His face had gone white beneath the healing cuts. His jaw was set like iron. Do not let them see you. Do not let them see me. His breathing was fast and shallow. If they come down here, tell them you are alone. Tell them your husband died on the trail and you are waiting for help. Why, who are they? He did not answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the window, tracking the riders as they moved along the ridge. Minutes passed. The hoofbeats faded. The riders disappeared over the far side of the hill without coming down. Nate let out a breath that seemed to take the last of his strength with it. He sagged against the wall, closed his eyes. You going to tell me what that was about? People looking for someone. His voice was flat. Careful. They cannot know I am here. Not yet. Looking for who, he opened his eyes, looked at her, and in that look, she saw something that made the hair on her arms stand up. Not guilt, not shame, something closer to desperation. The look of a man whose secret is not a small thing, whose hiding is not a game. Please, Lenora, just trust me on this. She did not press further, but she filed the moment away with all the other things that did not add up. The calloused hands, the weather reading, the bowline knots, the silver ring, the whispered confessions in the dark. And now, this. Men on horseback searching for someone, and a wounded stranger who would rather lie flat against a wall than be seen. The picture was forming. She could not see its shape yet, but she could feel its edges the way you feel the outline of something hidden beneath a cloth. Something big. Something that would change everything when the cloth was pulled away. 3 days in the cabin, and Nate could walk. Not well, not far, but he could hobble from the cot to the door without her arm beneath his shoulder. Could stand at the threshold and look out at the creek, the trees, the slice of blue sky visible through the canyon walls. Lenora watched him from the hearth, where she was grinding yarrow for a fresh poultice. His back was straight. Despite the limp, his shoulders squared, even when pain pulled at the corners of his mouth. A man used to standing tall, she reckoned. A man who did not take kindly to being brought low. She noticed other things too. Things that did not add up. His hands were calloused in a particular way, thick ridges across the palms where rains had worn grooves over years and years of riding. Not the hands of a drifter or a seasonal laborer. The hands of a man who worked his own land, his own horses, day after day, season after season. When he stepped outside, he read the sky the way other men read newspapers, scanning the clouds, testing the wind, noting the direction of the light, with an ease that came from a lifetime of depending on weather for his livelihood. He knew how to tie a bowline knot with one hand, knew the names of grasses by looking at them from a distance, knew which direction was north without checking the sun. These were not the skills of a man named Nate who happened to be passing through a canyon. These were the skills of a man who owned something worth knowing these things for. Lenora stored each observation away the way she stored herbs in labeled jars. Carefully, quietly, without letting him see. "I can help," Nate said one morning without turning from the doorway. "With the water, the firewood, something. You can rest. I have rested plenty." He turned then, and the morning light caught his face. The healing gash on his forehead, the stubble darkening his jaw, those gray eyes that gave away nothing and saw everything. Please. The words seemed to cost him something, like a coin pulled from a pocket that did not have many coins left. Let me be useful. Lenora set down the mortar, wiped her hands on her apron. Fine. You can fill the water pot. But if you tumble into that creek, I am not fishing you out. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but the closest thing to one she had seen from him yet. He did not fall. She watched from the doorway as he made his way down the bank, the wooden bucket hanging from his good hand. His bad leg dragged slightly. Twice he stopped to steady himself against a cottonwood trunk, but he reached the creek, filled the bucket, carried it back without spilling more than a few drops. By the time he reached the cabin, his face was gray with effort. Sweat darkened the collar of his shirt, but his eyes held something that had not been there before. Something fierce and hard won. She took the bucket from his hands. "Sit down before you fall down." He sat, did not argue. From that morning on, they worked. Together. Lenora gathered herbs and cooked what little food they could find. Nate hauled water and split kindling with a hand axe he found under the cot, working slowly, resting often, but never stopping until the task was done. They fell into a rhythm the way two people fall into step on a long road, not because they plan to, but because the walking itself teaches them how. The fifth afternoon was warm. Indian summer heat pressed against the canyon walls and turned the air thick and golden. Lenora had found chamomile growing in a sunny patch near the creek, and she was drying the flowers on a flat rock when Nate appeared beside her. "Show me," he said. "Show you what the plants, the ones you have been using on me." He gestured toward the creek bank where wild growth tangled green and silver in the sunlight. "I would like to learn." She studied his face for mockery. Found none. Just that strange intensity he carried with him everywhere, focused now entirely on her. "Why? Because you saved my life with them." He met her eyes straight on and held them there. "Seems like something worth knowing." Lenora considered saying no, considered retreating to the cabin to the safe distance she had been keeping these past days, like a wall built from silence and careful routine. But his eyes held genuine curiosity, the kind she rarely saw in men, and she had spent too many years being overlooked to turn away someone who actually wanted to listen. "All right, but pay attention. I do not intend to repeat myself." She taught him the way her mother had taught her. Hands in the dirt, names and uses braided together like thread. Mugwort. She pulled a stem, held it up so he could see the silvery underside of the leaves. They felt soft between her fingers, almost fuzzy, releasing their sharp green smell at her touch. Good for wounds and infections. You crush it into a paste with a little water. The smell tells you when it is ready. Bitter like medicine ought to be. Nate took the stem from her hand. Their fingers brushed, brief and warm like a match struck and blown out before it could catch. He turned the plant over, studying it with the same careful attention he gave everything. How do you know it is mugwort and not something that will make things worse? The leaves. Lenora knelt beside another clump. Damp earth soaked through her skirt at the knees, cool and rich smelling. See how they are cut almost like feathers, and that silver green color underneath. Nothing else around here looks quite like it. He knelt beside her. His shoulder was close to hers, close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him, smell the wood smoke and sweat, and something underneath that was just him. A scent she had come to know, without meaning, to the way you learn the particular creak of a floorboard, or the exact pitch of a door hinge in a place where you have lived long enough to stop noticing that you are noticing. Lenora stood up quick, moved to the next plant. Yarrow. She kept her voice steady. The white flowers there. Good for fever and bringing down swelling. You can steep it in hot water for tea or wrap the leaves straight on the skin. Nate followed her, slower his ankle protesting the uneven ground, but he did not complain, just watched and listened and asked questions that showed he was truly hearing what she said, not waiting for his turn to talk, not humoring her, learning. "What about that one?" He pointed to a low-growing plant near the water's edge, its leaves broad and deep green catching the light. "Doc." Lenora crouched down her reflection, wavering in the creek beside her. The water was so clear she could see the pebbles on the bottom, brown and gold and gray. Good for rashes, insect bites, that sort of thing. The root is the useful part. You have to dig for it, but you have to be careful. There is another plant that looks similar, grows further from the water. That one will make you plenty sick. How do you tell them apart? Practice. She let the leaves fall back into place. My mama made me learn every plant in the woods behind our place, tested me until I could name them with my eyes closed. Nate was quiet for a time. The creek sang between its banks. A dragonfly hovered over the water, blue-green wings catching the light. She sounds like a good woman. Your mother. Lenora's throat tightened. She turned away, pretended to study a cluster of chamomile growing between two flat rocks. The little white flowers nodded in the breeze, cheerful and small. She was practical. That is what kept us alive. They worked their way along the creek bank, Lenora pointing out plants, Nate listening and learning. The sun moved across the sky. Shadows lengthened. The air grew cooler as the afternoon wore on, carrying the sweet smell of water and green growing things. And Nate listened. Really listened. Not. And Nate listened. Really listened. Not the way men usually did, half their attention somewhere else. He took in every word, asked questions that proved he understood, stored each piece of information away like it mattered. Like she mattered. The thought caught her off guard. She stumbled on a root, and his hand shot out, catching her elbow. Warm and strong, steadying her before she could fall. Careful. Lenora pulled away too quick. Saw something cross his face. Surprise, maybe. Or something that might have been hurt there and gone before he could cover it over. Thank you kindly. The words came out stiff. They stood there, the creek singing between them, the afternoon light turning everything to gold. Lenora could still feel where his hand had been, warm against her arm, a ghost of pressure that would not fade. When I am healed up. Nate's voice was low, rough at the edges. When I can walk proper again. He paused, swallowed. I will have to go. She had known it was coming, had been bracing for it since that first morning he woke up in the cabin. But hearing him say it made something twist beneath her ribs, something she did not want to name and could not afford to feel. I know. She kept her voice flat. Careful. You have got your own life to get back to. Yes. The word dropped between them like a stone into still water, rings spreading outward in every direction. What about you? His voice stopped her as she turned toward the cabin. Where will you go, Crestwood, I reckon? Find work there. A laundry, maybe. Or a boarding house. There is always work for women who are not afraid of hard labor. By yourself. That is how I got here. That is how I will leave. Silence. The creek rushed on. A fish jumped somewhere downstream, a silver flash and a splash. It does not have to be that way. His voice was barely louder than the water. Alone, I mean. Lenora's breath caught. She turned slowly, found him watching her with something raw and unguarded written across his face. An expression he had not meant to show. A door he had opened by accident and could not close fast enough. What are you saying? He opened his mouth, closed it. The openness vanished, replaced by his usual careful blankness, like shutters slamming closed over a window where light had briefly shone. Nothing. He looked away. Never mind. Forget I said anything. But Lenora could not forget, could not unknow the way he had looked at her in that unguarded moment, like she was something worth having, something worth keeping. She walked back to the cabin without another word. Night fell over the canyon. The light thickened from a gold to amber to gray. Lenora fed the fire-checked Nate's bandages one last time, then settled into her spot on the floor near the hearth. Sleep came in pieces. She drifted up and down, aware of the fire's crackle, the creek's murmur, the rhythm of Nate's breathing from the cot. Then, in the deep quiet of the night, when the fire had burned down to its last embers, and the darkness was nearly complete, his voice came, quiet, rough, stripped of every guard he usually kept in place. 3 years back, he said it to the ceiling, or to the dark, or to nobody. A woman came. I thought she came because of me, because she saw something in me worth staying for. Lenora lay still, breathing slow, listening. Turns out she came for what I had, not who I was. Took everything and disappeared. Left me standing in my own house feeling like a stranger in it. The fire popped. A single ember flared orange, then faded. Since then, I have not. His voice cracked. The sound of something breaking that had been held together too long by stubbornness alone. I have not been able to trust that anyone could look at me and see just me, without calculating what I am worth. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Lenora had ever heard. She could feel him across the cabin, the weight of what he had said pressing down on both of them like a hand laid flat against the chest. She did not reach for him, did not cross the dark space between the hearth and the cot, did not say a word. She only lay there breathing, letting him know by the steadiness of her presence that she had heard him, that his words had landed somewhere safe, that she was still here. After a long time, his breathing changed, slowed, deepened, sleep pulling him under at last. Lenora opened her eyes, stared at the ceiling where the last light of the embers painted dim patterns on the wood. She had heard pain in her life, had lived with it, had watched her mother cough herself to death over 3 months of bloody handkerchiefs and sleepless nights. She knew what it sounded like when a person carried something too heavy for too long. And she knew lying there in the dark that whatever Nate was hiding from her went deeper than a false name. It went all the way down to the bone, down to the place where trust used to live before someone burned it out of him. She could not fix that, could not heal it with mugwort or yarrow or any herb that grew along any creek bank in the world. But she could be here. And sometimes her mother used to say being here is the whole of it. Lenora closed her eyes, and for the first time since stepping off that train at Thornfield Station, she did not dream of 47 words on a piece of yellowed paper. She dreamed instead of a voice in the dark, cracked and honest, saying things that most men would rather die than say out loud. She woke before dawn. Gray light seeped through the cracks in the walls. Nate was still sleeping, his face turned toward the wall, one arm hanging off the edge of the cot. In sleep, the hardness left his features. The lines around his eyes smoothed. The set of his jaw softened. He looked younger, unguarded, almost peaceful. Lenora rose, quietly wrapped the shawl around her shoulders, and stepped outside. The air was cold and clean sharp with the smell of pine and wet stone. The creek murmured its endless conversation with the rocks. A dove called somewhere in the canyon soft and low. She knelt at the water's edge, splashed her face. The cold stole her breath and gave it back cleaner. When she returned to the cabin, Nate was awake, sitting on the edge of the cot, looking at something in his hand. She stopped in the doorway, morning light behind her, shadow before her. And in that slice of space between the light and the dark, she saw it. The silver ring. The one she had noticed on his finger that first day in the canyon, the one that had been missing since the second morning. He held it between his thumb and forefinger, turning it slowly. The firelight from the revived coals caught something on the inside of the band. Letters. She could see them from where she stood, small and precise, but she could not read them. Not at this distance, not at this angle. His face looking down at that ring carried an expression she had not seen on him before. It was not guilt exactly, not shame exactly. It was something between the two. The face of a man standing at a crossroads, knowing that every direction leads somewhere he does not want to go. He heard her footstep on the threshold. His hand closed around the ring. Fast, the way a man closes his hand around something he does not want anyone else to see. Their eyes met across the cabin, 10 feet of packed dirt floor and smoky air between them. He slipped the ring into his coat pocket. Slowly, deliberately, not pretending he had not been holding it, not pretending she had not seen, but not explaining either. "Morning," he said. His voice gave away nothing. "Morning," she said back. Her voice gave away nothing either, but something had shifted between them. A new kind of knowing had entered the cabin alongside the morning light. She had seen the ring. He knew she had seen it. And neither one of them was going to speak of it. Not yet. Not today. Lenora crossed to the hearth, began preparing what was left of their food. Her hands moved through the familiar motions. Steady. Sure. The hands of a woman who had learned long ago that the truth does not need to be chased. It works itself free in its own time, like a splinter pushing up through the skin. All you have to do is wait, and watch, and be ready when it comes. She poured water into the pot, set it over the fire, and the morning went on. The same as every other morning in the cabin, except that it was not the same at all, and they both knew it, and neither one of them said a single word about why. 5 days in the cabin, and it had started to feel like something close to home. Lenora knew where the floorboards creaked, the spot near the door that groaned like an old man getting out of bed. The loose plank by the hearth that rocked if you stepped on its left edge. She knew which corner of the fireplace drew the best draft, how to angle the kindling so the smoke went up instead of out, how the morning light fell through the single window in a golden slant that reached the cot by mid-morning and crept across the floor like a slow tide. She knew the sound of Nate's breathing when he slept. Slow and deep, like water moving over stones, and the different sound when he was awake, but pretending not to be. Shallower, too even, too controlled. The breathing of a man who was listening. Small things, the kind that accumulated without asking permission, the kind that built a life before you noticed you were building one. Nate could walk now. Not just the careful hobble from cot to door, but actually walk. His gait was still uneven, favoring the bad ankle, but the limp had faded to barely a hitch in his stride. He moved around the cabin and the creek bank with growing ease, reclaiming his body piece by piece, the way a man reclaims a house after a long absence. Opening doors, testing floors, remembering where everything was. He had taken to rising before her. She would wake to find the fire already built. The water pot filled the cabin, swept with a broom he had fashioned from willow branches. Small acts of usefulness that he performed without comment, without expectation, without any sign that he wanted to be thanked. The work itself seemed to be enough. The doing of it. The proving to himself that his body still answered when he called. On the 6th morning, Lenora woke to something she did not expect. The light was pale just past dawn, the sky outside the window still holding the last gray of night. She pushed herself up on one elbow, blinking sleep from her eyes, and saw it. A small bunch of wildflowers, purple asters and white yarrow blossoms and a single stem of goldenrod bright as a candle flame, tucked into the battered tin cup and set on the floor beside where she slept, close enough that it was the first thing she would see when she opened her eyes. Nate was outside. She could hear the axe, the steady rhythm of it splitting kindling by the woodpile. Thock. Pause. Thock. Pause. The sound of a man who did not want to be inside when she found what he had left. Lenora sat up, looked at the flowers, touched one of the aster petals with her fingertip. It was soft and cool, still holding the morning dew. She did not say anything about the flowers when he came inside. He did not look at the cup. They ate in silence. The same silence they had been sharing for days now, but different somehow. Warmer, less careful. The silence of two people who had stopped needing words for every small thing. She kept the flowers in the cup all day, set it on the table where the light could reach them, and if Nate noticed, he gave no sign. But once when he thought she was not looking, she saw his eyes move to the cup, saw something cross his face that was almost a smile. Almost. That afternoon, a field mouse found its way into the cabin through a crack in the wall near the hearth. Lenora saw at first a small brown shape darting along the baseboard quick as a heartbeat. She reached for the broom without thinking, the way you do when something small and uninvited enters a place you have been keeping clean. Wait, Nate's voice stopped her mid-reach. He crossed the cabin in 3 slow steps and knelt beside the wall. The mouse froze, whiskers twitching, black eyes bright with fear. Nate extended his hand palm up and stayed very still, patient the way only someone accustomed to animals could be, the kind of patience that cannot be performed. It has to live inside a person the way breathing lives inside a person, natural and unthought. The mouse sniffed the air, crept forward, climbed into his cupped palm. Nate stood slowly, carried the creature to the door. Lenora watched his hands, those big, rough hands with their calluses and scars and split knuckles, holding the mouse the way you hold something made of glass, gentle and sure. He set it down in the grass outside the threshold, watched it disappear into the brush, then came back inside and sat down as though nothing had happened. Lenora looked at the broom in her hand, set it down, looked at the man who had just carried a mouse outside instead of killing it. Something behind her ribs shifted, the way earth shifts before a spring, making room for something that has not broken through yet, but is coming. She turned back to the fire, did not trust herself to speak. That afternoon, he asked her to teach him more. They walked the creek bank together, farther this time than before, past the flat rocks where the chamomile grew, past the bend where the water deepened, and slowed past the cottonwood grove where mockingbirds sang in the upper branches. Lenora showed him dockroot and its dangerous twin, showed him how to strip willow bark for tea that eased pain in the joints, showed him wild onion growing in clumps near the water's edge, pungent and sharp, good for broth if they could find nothing else. He learned the way a man learns who has been hungry for something he did not know how to name. Not just the plants, not just the uses, but the way she moved through the world, the way she read the land, the way she crouched beside a plant and touched its leaves with a tenderness that had nothing to do with sentimentality and everything to do with respect. Respect for what grew, for what healed, for what her mother had passed to her, and she was now, without quite realizing it, passing to him. You see that Lenora pointed to a cluster of small white berries growing on a low bush near the tree line. The berries were round and waxy, almost pretty in the afternoon light. Nate leaned closer. What is it? Do not touch it. Baneberry. 3 of those will stop your heart. She pulled his hand back from the bush. Her fingers closed around his wrist without thinking. His pulse jumped against her palm, quick and warm, and she let go as if she had touched the stove. My mama used to say, the prettiest things in the woods are usually the ones trying to kill you. She kept walking, did not look back, could feel him watching her anyway. They reached a wide flat rock that jutted out over a quiet pool in the creek. The water here was deep and still green as bottle glass, reflecting the sky and the canyon walls, and the 2 of them standing at its edge. Lenora sat down on the rock. After a moment, Nate sat beside her, not too close, but closer than he would have a week ago. The sun was low. It painted the canyon in shades of amber and rust and deep gold. A hawk circled overhead, riding the last thermals of the day. Its shadow passed over them and was gone. You know things most people have forgotten, Nate said. His voice was quiet. The voice he used when he was saying something that mattered. These plants, these remedies. There are doctors in towns who do not know half of what you carry in your head. Lenora picked up a pebble from the rock, smooth and gray, warmed by the sun. She turned it in her fingers. My mother could not afford doctors, so she made herself into one. She watched other women who knew the old ways, begged them to teach her. Sat up nights copying remedies into that journal by candlelight. And then she taught me. Everything she learned, she gave to me, like she knew she would not be around long enough to use it all herself. She tossed the pebble into the pool. It broke the surface with a quiet plop. Rings spread outward, widening, touching the banks, then fading. She passed when I was 17. Consumption, 3 months of coughing and fever, and then one morning she just stopped, like a clock that runs down and nobody winds it again. The words came out plain. No tremor, no tears. She had cried herself dry years ago. What was left was just the fact of it, clean and hard as a stone at the bottom of a creek. Nate did not say he was sorry, did not offer comfort. He sat beside her on the warm rock and let the silence hold what words could not. Your father, he asked finally. Never knew him. Never knew his name. Mama worked in a textile mill until her lungs gave out. She told me once that he had kind hands. That is the only thing I know about the man who made me. The creek murmured. The hawk circled back. Shadows grew longer on the canyon walls. So you came west, all alone. Was there another way? The question sat between them, heavy with everything it did not say. They walked back to the cabin as the light faded, their shoulders almost touching. The space between them had narrowed over the past days, not by any single moment, but by the slow accumulation of hours spent in each other's company. Cooking, cleaning, tending, teaching, the ordinary work of staying alive, which is also, if you do it beside another person long enough, the ordinary work of building something that does not have a name yet, but has a weight you can feel when you lie down at night and listen to them breathe. Lenora was learning him the way she learned plants, by observation, by patience, by paying attention to the things he did not say as much as the things he did. He was gentle with the horse, spoke to her in low tones when he brushed her coat, his hands moving in long, slow strokes along her flanks. When a bird with a broken wing landed in the dirt near the woodpile, he picked it up and held it against his chest, cupping it with both hands so it could not struggle and hurt itself worse. He carried it to a sheltered spot beneath a cottonwood and set it down in the dry leaves where it could rest out of the sun and the wind. Lenora watched from the doorway and said nothing, but she saw. He was strongest when he thought nobody was watching. She would catch him standing at the cabin door before dawn, face turned toward the sky shoulders, carrying a weight that had nothing to do with muscle or bone. And in those moments he looked not like a man recovering from injury, but like a man recovering from something much older and much deeper. Something that had broken a long time ago and healed crooked. On the 7th day, she found him sitting on the woodpile at dusk. His hands were still. His eyes were fixed on the middle distance where the canyon walls caught the last copper light of evening. He did not hear her approach. Or maybe he did, and chose not to move. "You do not talk much about yourself." The words came out before she could stop them. She stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching his profile against the dying sky. "Nothing worth telling. Everybody has got a story. Some stories are better left alone. You know mine." She kept her voice even. "The mill, my mother, the letters, the train. I have told you just about everything there is to tell." He turned his head, looked at her. The distance between them could not have been more than 6 feet, but it felt like a canyon. "What do you want from me, Lenora?" The question hung in the air. She thought about it, really thought the way her mother had taught her to think about important things. Slowly, from all sides. "Nothing," she said at last. "I do not want anything from you." She turned to go inside. His voice stopped her. "That man who sent for you. This Drummond fellow. What did you want from him?" Lenora's hand stilled on the doorframe. "A roof over my head. 4 walls. A place where I belonged. That is all. What else would there be? Most women want more than that. Security, comfort, money. Most women have choices." Lenora pushed the door open. "Whoever ends up taking me in it will not be for money. It will be for this." She gestured at the cabin, the creek, the herbs drying on the table inside. "For somebody who sees me, not what they can get from me." She stepped inside, let the door close behind her. Behind her in the fading light, she heard Nate draw a sharp breath, heard him whisper something too quiet to make out. Something that sounded almost like a name that was not Nate. The storm came without warning. One moment the evening sky was streaked with purple and gold, the air still and warm with the last heat of September. The next black clouds swallowed the canyon rim whole, and the air turned thick and charged. The kind of heaviness that pressed against Lenora's ears and made the hair on her arms stand straight. Get inside. They barely crossed the threshold before the first drops fell, fat and heavy, striking the roof like flung gravel. Then the sky split open, and water came down in sheets so thick she could not see the creek anymore, though it was only 20 paces from the door. The roof began to leak almost at once. First one drip, then another, then a steady stream in the corner near the cot. Water running down the wall in dark trails. Lenora grabbed the bucket, positioned it beneath the worst of the flow. Nate was already dragging the cot toward the far wall, his bad ankle forgotten in the urgency. They worked without speaking. No time for words. Only hands moving fast. Lenora gathered what she could save. The blankets, her valise, the precious herbs she had spent days collecting. Nate wrestled the table away from a growing pool, stacked the remaining food on the highest shelf he could reach. Lightning cracked across the darkness. Thunder followed so close the whole cabin shook on its foundation. The horse screamed outside a sound of pure animal terror. Nate was on his feet and through the door before Lenora could react. She stumbled to the doorway. Lightning showed her the scene in frozen snapshots. Nate fighting through mud that sucked at his boots. The horse rearing against her tether, eyes white with fear. Rain driving sideways so thick it looked like smoke. She watched him grab for the reins. Watched his boots slide in the muck. Watched him go down hard, face first into the mud. The horse's hooves came down inches from his head. He rolled, came up on his hands and knees, mud coating his face, filling his mouth. He spat, grabbed for the reins again. The horse reared. He held on. His bad leg buckled. He went down on one knee and the muck sank past his ankle, but his grip on the reins did not break. The horse screamed again, pulled, fought. Then something shifted. The animal's head dropped. Her sides heaved. She stood trembling, beaten down by the storm, and Nate pulled himself upright, using the saddle for support. He led her to the sheltered side of the cabin, tied the reins to a post, driven deep. His hand slipped twice on the wet leather. When he came back inside, he looked like something the earth had chewed up and spat out. Mud caked every inch of him. Water streamed off his body in rivers. He stood in the doorway, dripping, staring at nothing. By midnight, the cabin had become a swamp. The corner near the hearth was the only spot still dry. A space maybe 4 feet square, pressed against the warm stones. The fire had died when water found its way down the chimney, turning the coals to hissing black nothing. Darkness complete, except when lightning split the sky. They huddled there, backs to the wall. The single moth-eaten blanket stretched across both their shoulders. Lenora's dress was soaked from the waist down, heavy and cold, plastered to her skin. Her teeth chattered. She drew her knees up, wrapped her arms around them, tried to make herself small. This was what her life had come to. Crouching in a leaking shack in the middle of nowhere, covered in mud and creek water, shivering beside a man she did not really know. No money, no prospects. No one in the world who knew or cared whether she lived or died. The woman who had stepped off the train at Thornfield Station with a clean dress and a hopeful heart seemed like a stranger now. A fool. A child who had believed that 47 words could change her life. Her mother would be ashamed. The thought hit her like a slap. She pressed her face against her knees, hiding from the darkness, hiding from Nate, hiding from herself. And then the tears came. She did not decide to cry, did not give permission. They simply came pushing past every wall she had built every year of practice, at holding herself together, every lesson about strength and practicality, and keeping moving forward. They came, and they would not stop. Silent tears at first, then the kind that shook her shoulders and stole her breath, and left her gasping in the dark like a woman drowning on dry land. She waited for him to say something, to tell her it would be all right, to offer some hollow comfort the way people do when they cannot stand the sound of someone else's pain. He did not speak. He did not touch her. He did not move. He only reached down and pulled the edge of the blanket higher over her shoulders, tucked it close against her neck where the cold was getting in. A small thing, the smallest thing, but it said what words could not. I am here. I see you. You do not have to be strong right now. Lenora cried until there was nothing left, until the tears dried up and the shaking stopped, and she was just a woman sitting in the dark, empty and clean the way a creek bed is clean after a flash flood has scoured it down to bare stone. Then his voice came, low and rough and stripped of every pretense. "Lenora, there is something I need to tell you." She lifted her head, found his face in the darkness. A pale shape, nothing more. Mud still streaking his jaw, his eyes catching the faintest light from somewhere silver in the black. "I have not been honest with you. When you found me in that canyon, when you asked my name, Thunder exploded overhead. So close, the cabin walls bowed inward. The horse screamed outside. Nate was on his feet before Lenora could draw breath, lurching toward the door. The horse. If she runs off, we have got nothing. He disappeared into the wall of rain. Again, for the second time that night, throwing himself into the storm to save an animal, and Lenora sat in the dark with his unfinished sentence hanging in the air like smoke, understanding with a certainty that went beyond words that what he had been about to say would have changed everything. He came back soaked and shaking, stood in the doorway, dripping filth onto what was left of the floor. "What were you going to tell me?" The question came out harder than she meant. He flinched, like she had struck him across the face. "Nothing." He turned away, moved toward the dry corner. "It does not matter." "It does matter. You were about to say something, and I want to know what it was." Lightning flashed. His face appeared in the white light, mud-streaked, exhausted, and something else. Something that looked like shame, burning so bright it hurt to look at. "Not tonight." His voice was barely a whisper. "Please, not tonight." Lenora studied him for a long moment. The mud in his hair, the tremor in his hands, the way he could not meet her eyes. She stepped aside, let him pass. They did not speak again that night. Lenora curled into her corner, wet and cold. Nate sat against the opposite wall, the blanket draped over his shoulders, mud drying in cracks across his face. The storm raged on, but inside the cabin, a different kind of silence had taken hold. The silence of something that had almost been said, almost been opened, almost been let into the light. Almost. She must have slept because she woke to stillness. The rain had stopped. Gray light seeped through the cracks, showing the ruin of their shelter. Mud everywhere. Standing water in the low spots. Their belongings scattered and soaked. Nate was already up, already standing at the door looking out at a world washed clean and new. He had scraped most of the mud from his face, though traces still clung in his hairline and behind his ears. His clothes were stiff with dried dirt. "We need to go." He did not turn around. "Go where away from here. This place will not make it through another storm. And there is somewhere I need to take you." Where he was quiet for a long moment. The morning birds were singing. The creek rushed past, swollen and brown with storm water carrying branches and leaves and the wreckage of the night before. "Trust me." His voice was rough, scraped, raw. "Can you do that? Just trust me." Lenora thought about the night before, the interrupted confession, the shame in his eyes. She thought about all the things she did not know, all the questions he would not answer. She thought about the ring hidden in his pocket and the name he whispered in the dark, and the way the station master had said hope this time is different. She thought about her mother, about how her mother had followed a man whose name Lenora never learned, a man with kind hands, into a life that gave her nothing but a daughter and a short, hard road to a grave in St. Louis. Her mother, who never once said she regretted it, who said instead that some roads you walk not because you know where they lead, but because something in your chest tells you this is the one. Yes, Lenora said. I reckon I can. Something moved across his face. Relief, maybe. Or resignation. Or something too complicated to name. Something that looked like a man who has just been given one more chance and knows with absolute certainty that he does not deserve it. Good. He turned back to the ruined cabin. We leave as soon as you are ready. The horse carried them both. Lenora sat in front, her hands gripping the worn leather of the saddle horn. Nate sat behind her, one arm loose around her waist to keep her steady. His chest was warm against her back, solid and real through the damp fabric of their clothes. His breath stirred the hair at her temple with each exhale. They had been riding for 2 hours. The canyon had given way to rolling hills, the hills to open grassland that stretched toward the horizon in waves of gold and brown and pale green. Lenora had never seen so much empty space in all her life. In St. Louis, buildings crowded together like teeth in a jaw, blocking out the sky. Here, the sky went on forever, blue and endless. Clouds piled up on the horizon like mountains made of cotton. The storm had washed the world clean. Everything smelled of wet earth and sage, fresh and sharp. The kind of clean that makes you feel like the world has forgiven itself for something and is ready to start over. Where are we going? She had asked the question 3 times already. Each time Nate had given the same answer. You will see. The 4th time, she stopped asking. The rider appeared near midday. A young man on a paint horse coming over a rise to the east, driving a small herd of cattle toward a fence line in the distance. Lenora watched him notice them. She felt the change in him. The way his 1,000 works virtue was door Chuckydio border worse were That's the change in him. The way his breathing shifted. The way every muscle in his body went taut as a wire. The rider pulled up 20 feet away. Dust rose from his horse's hooves, caught the sunlight, settled slow. He pushed back his hat, revealing a sun-darkened face creased with surprise. Mr. Drummond? He touched his hat brim. Respectful. We have been looking for you, sir. Whole outfit has been out searching since last week. Had riders combing every canyon between here and the territorial line. The riders on the ridge, the ones Nate had hidden from, his own men, searching for their boss. And he had pressed himself against the wall of that cabin, like a man running from the law, rather than let them find him. Because if they had found him, they would have called him by his real name. And she would have known. Lenora's spine went rigid. Mr. Drummond. The name landed on her like a physical thing, like a stone dropped from a great height onto the center of her chest. She felt the impact spread outward through her body, numbing her fingers on the saddle horn, hollowing out her stomach, turning the warm, solid weight of the man behind her into something she did not recognize. She did not turn around, did not look at his face, could not look. Not yet. Not while the ground was still shifting under her. I am fine, Boone. Had some trouble in the canyon. This woman here found me, took care of me. The rider, Boone Kincaid, glanced at Lenora. Curiosity flickered in his eyes and was gone, quickly hidden behind the blank face of a man who knew better than to ask questions of the man who paid his wages. "Yes, sir. Should I ride ahead? Let Calhoun know you are coming in." "Do that." Boone touched his hat again, wheeled his horse, and took off at a gallop toward the horizon. Lenora watched him go, watched him shrink to a dark speck against the golden grass, the way the train had shrunk against the horizon 9 days ago when she stood on that platform and waited for a man who never came. Except he did come. He was sitting right behind her, had been sitting across from her in that cabin for over a week, eating her cornbread, drinking her tea, learning her mother's remedies, listening to her secrets, watching her cry, "Mr. Drummond." She said the name flat and hard, testing its weight on her tongue. "That is what he called you." Nate said nothing. His arm stayed around her waist, but it felt different now, heavier, like a chain instead of a shelter. They passed 2 more riders before reaching the gate. Each one stopped. Each one touched his hat. Each one called him Mr. Drummond, or simply Sir, with the kind of deference that cannot be learned or faked. The deference of men who depended on another man for their livelihood. "You are going to explain." She said, her voice steady and cold as creek water in January. "When we get wherever we are going, you are going to explain everything." "Yes." His voice was barely more than a breath against her hair. "I will." The buildings grew larger as they approached. What she had taken for a single structure from far off turned out to be many. A main house with a wraparound porch. A long bunkhouse with smoke rising from its chimney. A barn bigger than any building Lenora had ever seen. Stables, corrals, outbuildings she could not name. All of it spread across the landscape like a small town unto itself. And then she saw the gate, massive posts of weathered oak silver gray with age, with a crossbeam high overhead. Mounted on that crossbeam was a star. 5 points, wrought iron, black against the blue sky. Star Ranch. Lenora's hands went numb on the saddle horn. She could hear her own heartbeat, feel it pounding against her ribs, but everything else seemed very far away, like watching herself from a great distance, like a dream she could not wake from. The gate stood open. Beyond it, a packed dirt road led toward the main house, 2 stories tall, white painted rails along the porch, lace curtains in the windows, smoke rising from the chimney, red geraniums blooming in boxes beneath the windows, bright as drops of blood against the white clapboard. A home. A real home. The kind Lenora had dreamed about in her narrow boarding house bed back when she still let herself dream. The kind she had imagined when she read and reread those 47 words until the paper went soft at the folds. And the man who owned it all was sitting behind her on a horse she had led through the dark. The man whose fever she had broken with her mother's herbs. The man she had fed with her last cornbread when she thought he had nothing in this world but a false name and a battered pair of boots. The horse stopped just inside the gate. An old man came from the barn, white hair flying beneath a battered hat, weathered face creased deep by sun and wind, bow-legged gait of someone who had spent 60 years in the saddle. He was shouting something, words tumbling over each other, and then he was at the horse's side, looking up with tears cutting tracks through the dust on his cheeks. "Silas. Sweet mercy, we thought you were dead. Found your hat in that canyon, all that blood on the rocks. Been searching high and low for 9 days. Silas." The name hit Lenora like a bucket of cold water dumped over her head in winter. She turned, looked at the man behind her, really looked, the way she should have looked from the very first day. His face had gone pale beneath the sunburn and the healing cuts. His jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath the skin. And his eyes, those gray eyes that had watched her so carefully for 9 days and 9 nights, were fixed on her face with something that looked like a man waiting for the axe to fall. Silas. The word came out wrong, crooked, like a nail bent in the driving. Not Nate. He did not deny it. Silas Drummond. Her voice grew stronger, harder. Drummond, the man who wrote me those letters. The man who was supposed to meet me at the station. The man who owns the largest ranch between here and the territorial line. The old man, Calhoun, went quiet. His eyes moved between them, relief giving way to confusion. Lenora was already sliding down from the horse. Her legs were unsteady beneath her. Her hands shook as she gripped the saddle to keep from falling. Her boots hit the packed dirt. The ground felt too solid, too real. She turned to face him. He was still mounted, still looking down at her, still wearing that terrible expression. You knew, from the very beginning. You knew who I was. Yes, one word, no excuse, no explanation, and you let me think. Her voice cracked. She swallowed, started again. You let me tell you everything. My mother, the letters, why I came west, all of it. And the whole time you knew. Yes. Behind them, hands were gathering, faces appearing in doorways and around corners drawn by the commotion. Calhoun had backed away, gesturing urgently to someone near the barn. Lenora did not care who heard or who saw or who knew. I saved your life. The words scraped out of her throat. I pulled you out of that canyon. I sat up all night when you were burning with fever. I gave you half my food when I was starving myself. I taught you my mother's medicine like you were worth teaching. She stopped, could not go on. The anger was rising from somewhere deep, choking her, and underneath it, something worse, something that felt like grief. Grief for the man she thought she had been getting to know, the man who did not exist, the man named Nate who had no ranch and no cattle and no fortune, who was just a wounded stranger she had saved because it was the right thing to do. That man was a lie. And the truth was standing in front of her, wearing his face. Silas swung down from the horse, slowly, carefully. His bad ankle nearly gave way when his boots hit the ground, but he caught himself on the saddle, straightened, and faced her. I am sorry. Sorry. The word tasted like ash on her tongue. You are sorry. There is nothing I can say that will make this right. His voice was quiet, steady, the voice of a man who had made his choice and was prepared to stand in the wreckage of it. I lied to you. I tested you. I let you believe I was somebody I was not because I wanted to know. He met her eyes, held them. Whether you were real. He gestured at the house, the barn, the land stretching out in every direction. Thousands of acres, thousands of cattle, a fortune in grass and water and sky. Whether you were different from the others. Whether you came out here looking for me or looking for all this. And what did you decide? You gave me half your cornbread when you thought I did not have a dime to my name. His voice had dropped so low she had to strain to hear it over the wind. You taught me about plants like I was worth teaching. You sat with me through that storm when you could have stayed warm by what was left of the fire. You cried in front of me and did not ask me to fix it. You just let me be there. He took a step toward her. She did not back away. And the answer is, you deserve better. Better than a man who lies. Better than a man who tests people because he is too scared to trust them. So you are sending me off? No. The word came out sharp, almost desperate. I am telling you the truth. Finally. All of it. And then I am asking you to choose. Choose what? That room on the second floor. The one with the windows facing east, where the morning light comes in first. I had it fixed up for you. For my bride. There are dresses in the wardrobe, books on the shelves, a rocking chair by the window. Everything I could think of that a woman might want. It is yours if you want it. The room, the ranch, everything I have. But only if you want it. Only if you can find it in you to forgive a fool and a coward who was too afraid of being hurt again to tell the truth to the one person who deserved it most. I need time, Lenora said finally. Time to think. Take as long as you need. It might be a good while. I will wait. Lenora walked toward the house. At the porch steps, she stopped, turned back. Silas. He looked up. Those letters you wrote me. Those 47 words. Were any of them real? He did not hesitate. Every last one. She climbed the steps, crossed the porch, disappeared through the door. The room smelled of lavender and lemon oil. Lenora stood in the doorway, unable to move. The bed was made up with a white quilt hand stitched in a pattern of interlocking rings. A wardrobe of dark oak stood against one wall, its doors slightly open to show the edges of fabric inside. Calico. Gingham. Something that might have been blue silk, folded careful as a prayer. A wash stand held a porcelain basin painted with tiny roses. A rocking chair sat by the window positioned to catch the morning light. A shelf of books. A silver-backed brush on the dresser. He had prepared all of this for her. For a woman he had never met. And the cruelty of it was that he had come close to getting it right. So close that standing in this room felt like standing inside a wound. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass and closed her eyes. The knock came later that afternoon. She had washed her face, combed her hair, changed into a simple blue cotton dress from the wardrobe. She looked at herself in the mirror. Thinner, older, but the eyes were the same. Her mother's eyes. Dark and steady. Come in. The door opened, but it was not Silas. A woman stood on the threshold. Sturdy frame. Iron gray hair pulled back tight. Deep-set eyes that moved over Lenora the way a buyer moves over livestock at auction. Mrs. Dorothea Prewitt. The woman did not offer her hand, did not smile. Another mail-order bride. The words fell into the room like stones into still water. The last one, a woman called Lorraine Birch. She came with sweet words and a pretty smile. Married Silas Drummond inside a month. I baked a cake myself. Buttercream frosting. My mother's recipe. Her voice did not waver, but something in her eyes flickered. The memory of a cake baked in good faith for a wedding that turned out to be a lie. 6 weeks later, she was gone. $2,000 out of his safe and a gambler from Abilene warming her bed. Turned out she had been married the whole time. They had been running the same game for years. Ranch to ranch. Territory to territory. Picking men clean like crows on a carcass. Mrs. Prewitt stepped further into the room. Her eyes swept over the wardrobe, the quilt, the rocking chair by the window. She touched the blue silk dress with one finger, the way you touch something that hurts to look at. He prepared this room himself. Did you know that? Not the hired help. Him, Silas Drummond on his hands and knees, sanding these floors, hanging those curtains, choosing those books one by one from the catalog because he did not know what kind of stories you might like, so he ordered every kind there was. Her voice cracked just slightly on the last words. Then she pulled it back together the way women of her generation did, seamlessly, like mending a tear in good fabric so the seam does not show. So you will forgive me for wondering how long this one lasts. Lenora looked at Mrs. Prewitt, looked at the iron gray hair and the set jaw and the eyes that had already decided who Lenora Hadwell was before she had spoken a single word. I do not know Lorraine Birch. Lenora's voice came out steady, quiet, the quiet of deep water, not shallow. I do not know what she did or why she did it, but I know who I am. I am the daughter of a woman who worked herself to death in a textile mill so I could eat. I am the woman who pulled a stranger out of a rockslide with my bare hands and sat up through his fever all night with nothing but crushed weeds and creek water and a prayer. I am the woman who gave away half her last food to a man she thought had nothing because that is what my mama taught me to do. And I do not need your permission to stand in this room. Something shifted behind Mrs. Prewitt's eyes, brief as heat lightning on a summer night. She turned on her heel and walked away without another word. That night, Lenora packed her valise, not in anger. The anger had burned through her hours ago, leaving something quieter and more complicated in its place. She packed because she did not know if she was staying for the right reasons or simply because she had nowhere else to go. And the difference between those two things mattered more than anything Silas Drummond had or could ever give. She was closing the clasp when she looked out the window. The moon was up, full and white, turning the ranch yard to silver. And there on the porch below, sitting in the dark with his back against the post, was Silas, alone, hat off, head bowed, shoulders curved inward, the posture of a man who had folded in on himself like a letter nobody wanted to read. Footsteps on the porch. Calhoun appeared from the shadows, carrying 2 tin cups that steamed in the cool night air. He set one beside Silas without a word, lowered himself onto the bench with the careful movements of old joints and long years. They sat in silence. Then Calhoun spoke. His voice carried up through the open window. Your mother, God rest her, used to say something. Said it so many times I can hear her voice saying it still. She used to say that fear kills more things than any enemy ever could. Fear of losing what you have. Fear of trusting what you do not. Fear of standing still long enough for somebody to see who you really are. Silas did not lift his head. Calhoun took a slow sip. She would have liked this one. Your mother would have seen what I see. What you see too, if you would stop being so busy punishing yourself long enough to look. I did this to myself, Calhoun. Silas's voice came rough and broken. She was right there, right in front of me for 9 days. And I could not make myself tell the truth because I was too afraid she would leave. And now she is going to leave anyway. And it is exactly what I deserve. His shoulders shook. Once. Twice. Then something broke loose inside him, and he pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes and bent forward until his forehead nearly touched his knees. The sound that came out of him was not crying exactly. It was the sound of a man who had held everything inside for so long that the letting go of it was a physical thing, violent and involuntary, like a dam giving way after years of pressure against stone. His whole body trembled with it. His breath came in ragged gasps. He did not try to stop it, did not try to put the pieces back together. Just let it come and come and come until there was nothing left. Calhoun did not speak, did not touch him, just sat there in the moonlight sipping his coffee, waiting. The way old men wait, patient as stone, because he had seen enough of the world to know that some things cannot be hurried and some pain cannot be carried for another person. All you can do is sit beside them while they carry it themselves. After a long time, Silas straightened, drew a shaking breath, wiped his face with the back of his hand. Calhoun was quiet for another moment. Then, gently, that girl did not come 1,000 miles to find a man who gives up before the sun comes up. She came looking for somebody who would stay. Might be you ought to show her what that looks like. He put his hand on Silas's shoulder, just for a moment. Then he walked off into the dark. Lenora stood at the window for a long time after Calhoun left, watching Silas sit alone in the silver light, watching him slowly uncurl, watching him lift his face to the sky and breathe. She thought about cornbread, about splitting the last piece in half and giving the bigger portion to a man she thought had nothing, about the look on his face when he held it in his palm. She set the valise by the door, not unpacked, not put away, just set down. The way you set down something heavy when your arms are tired, but you have not decided yet whether you are done carrying it. Then she lay down on the bed with the white quilt and did not sleep. Morning came slow and golden. She rose, washed her face, put on the same blue cotton dress, picked up her valise. She walked down the stairs, each step deliberate, each step a choice. The house was quiet, but not entirely quiet. From the kitchen came the sound of a cabinet opening and closing, the clink of a bowl on a countertop, a muffled curse the kind a man makes when he has dropped something and discovered that his hands, which are good at holding reins and swinging axes, are not good at this. Lenora turned the corner, and there at the stove with his sleeves rolled to the elbows and his back to her was Silas Drummond. He was making cornbread. His hands were covered in flour. Cornmeal dusted his forearms, his shirt front, the dark hair falling across his forehead. The countertop looked like a small explosion had taken place on its surface. A cracked bowl with batter dripping down its side. A puddle of buttermilk creeping toward the edge. An eggshell on the floor. Another eggshell in the batter where it did not belong. The cornbread came out of the oven lopsided. One side golden, the other side too dark, edging toward burned. Not round, not even. It looked like something earnest and imperfect and trying so hard to be enough that it almost hurt to look at. He cut it. His hands were not steady. He put the larger piece on a plate, the blue and white china plate from the good set, pushed it toward the empty chair across from him, the bigger piece facing out, toward where she would sit, if she sat. Then he looked up and saw her in the doorway. He did not speak, did not explain, did not say, "I am sorry," or "Please stay," or "Give me another chance." He just stood there in his flour-dusted shirt with cornmeal on his hands and a plate of imperfect cornbread on the table between them. And Lenora understood. This was his answer, not in words. Words had failed him. This was something older than words, simpler, truer. A man standing in a kitchen at dawn, making the one thing he had seen her give when she had nothing left to give, because he did not know any other way to say what he meant. Lenora looked at the cornbread, looked at the man, looked at the valise in her hand. She set it down, not by the door this time. She set it against the wall in the corner where it would be out of the way. Then she pulled out the chair, sat down, picked up the larger piece of cornbread, broke it in half, put one half back on the plate, pushed the plate toward him, ate. The cornbread was dry, slightly bitter where it had burned. Nothing like her mother's recipe. But she chewed, and she swallowed, and she did not look away from his face while she did it. Silas picked up his half, looked at it the way he had looked at that first piece of cornbread in the cabin. The same expression, the same bewilderment, the same naked wonder of a man who is being given something he did not earn and does not know how to hold. He ate. They sat across from each other in the morning light, eating cornbread that was not very good, not speaking, not needing to, not forgiven, not yet. Maybe not for a good while yet. But here, both of them, choosing to stay. And for now, for this morning, that was enough. The porch faced west. Lenora sat in the rocking chair she had carried down from the upstairs room because she preferred watching the sky to watching walls. The chair creaked with a rhythm that reminded her of something old and safe, though she could not say exactly what. The sun hung low over the grassland, painting the world in shades of honey and amber. A meadowlark sang somewhere beyond the fence, its song bright and complicated. Silas stood a few feet away, leaning against the porch post, hat in his hands, turning it slowly by the brim. Those 47 words. He set it to the horizon. You asked me if any of them were real. You have not answered. Not really. He turned the hat one more revolution. I wrote that letter 7 times, 7 drafts, each one longer than the last. Pages and pages about the ranch, the land, what I could offer. And each time I read it back and tore it up because it sounded like a man trying to sell something instead of a man trying to say something true. 47 words is what was left when I stripped away everything that was not honest. Every last one of them is real. Lenora held his gaze. The light was softening his face, warming the gray of his eyes until they looked like rain on still water. That room upstairs, she said. You told me it had everything a woman could want. I believed it did. You were wrong. It was missing the most important thing. He went still. What is that trust? Lenora's voice was quiet but sure. The way the creek was quiet in the deep pool where water ran slow and clear. That is the one thing you cannot buy or build or set out pretty on a shelf. It has to be earned, day by day, choice by choice. And there is no shortcut through it. The sun touched the edge of the world. Shadows stretched long across the yard. But I am willing to give it a chance to grow. She looked at him. If you are? Silas straightened, took a step toward her, stopped, not because he was afraid, but because he understood that the distance between them was hers to close. I am. 2 words. 47 had brought her here. 2 might be enough to make her stay. The days that followed moved with the slow rhythm of the land itself, unhurried, patient, the rhythm of things that grow because they are given room and light and time to put down roots. Lenora started a garden beside the kitchen door. Not flowers, herbs. She dug the beds herself, turning the red earth until it was loose and dark and ready. Mugwort went in first, then yarrow, Then dock and chamomile and wild mint, transplanted from the creek bank, the roots wrapped in damp cloth and carried back like small living gifts. Silas built raised beds without being asked. She came out one morning to find him on his knees in the dirt, hammering cedar planks into frames, sawdust in his hair. He did not look up, did not explain, just worked. When he finished, he stood and walked away, leaving the beds like an offering set at a door. No words needed, no words given. Old Calhoun taught her to ride. A gentle bay mare named Penny Brown as buckwheat honey with a white sock on her left foreleg. Calhoun led them in patient circles around the corral, his bow-legged stride keeping pace beside them, one hand resting easy on Penny's bridle while he talked in that slow, unhurried way of his. He told her how to sit deep in the saddle, how to use her knees more than her hands, how to let the horse feel her intentions through the small shifts of her weight, rather than hauling on the reins like she was trying to stop a runaway freight car. Lenora fell off twice. The first time she landed hard on her backside in the dust and sat there staring up at the sky, the breath knocked clean out of her. Penny turned around and looked at her with an expression that could only be described as patient disappointment. Calhoun extended a hand and pulled her up without comment. The second time, she went over sideways when Penny spooked at a jackrabbit that bolted from beneath the fence rail. She hit the ground rolling and was back on her feet before Calhoun could reach her, brushing the dirt from her dress with quick, angry movements. "Get back on 3 times, Calhoun said. "That is the rule of the West. You fall off twice, you get back on 3 times. 3rd time tells the horse you mean it." She got back on. By the end of the week, she could hold a trot, and Calhoun told Boone Kincaid she had better hands than half the outfit, which was kind more than accurate, but made her smile all the same. She placed her mother's herb journal on the bookshelf in her room, set it beside the leather volumes Silas had bought. The journal looked small and plain next to them. Water-stained cover, pages soft with age, but it held more knowledge between its pressed flowers and fading ink than all those handsome spines combined. 2 lives on one shelf, side by side, beginning to learn each other. The following week, a ranch hand named Guthrie brought his young daughter to the house. The child had stepped on a nail, and the wound had gone angry and red-hot to the touch, the skin around it tight and shiny with infection. Guthrie stood in the kitchen, wringing his hat in his hands while the girl cried in her mother's arms. They had sent for the doctor in Crestwood, but he was 2 days' ride away, attending a difficult birth. Lenora knelt beside the girl, looked at the foot, looked at the mother. She did not wait for the doctor. She boiled water, cleaned the wound with care that made the girl stop crying, not because it did not hurt, but because the hands doing the hurting were steady and sure and kind. She made a poultice of yarrow and dock root from her garden, packed it against the wound, wrapped it clean, brewed willow bark tea for the pain and chamomile for the fear. The infection broke by morning. By the 3rd day, the girl was walking again. Word traveled the way word does in small places, quietly, through kitchen doors and across fence lines and between women hanging laundry in the wind. Within a week, 2 more families came to the ranch asking for the herb woman. Lenora did not charge, did not refuse. She treated a cowhand's infected blister, a rancher's wife's aching joints, a baby's croup that had kept the whole household awake for 3 nights running. Silas watched from a distance, said nothing. But one morning, Lenora found a new wooden shelf mounted on the kitchen wall with small hooks for drying herbs, and a row of clean glass jars with cork stoppers, each one labeled in his careful handwriting. Mugwort, yarrow, chamomile, dock, willow. She ran her fingers over the labels, over his handwriting. The letters were square and deliberate, the penmanship of a man who had learned to write with purpose rather than grace. She stood there for a long time, touching those labels, and felt something inside her chest shift and settle the way the last piece of a puzzle clicks into place, and suddenly you can see the whole picture. Silas did not push, did not crowd. He gave her room the way you give a wild thing room, not out of indifference, but out of respect for the kind of trust that cannot be demanded, only invited. He left the kitchen before she came down for breakfast, but the coffee was always made, and the stove was always warm. He walked the fences at dawn and returned at dusk, and if their paths crossed during the day, he would nod and she would nod, and sometimes one of them would say something small about the weather or the garden or the way the light fell across the hills at a certain hour, and those small things accumulated the way rain accumulates in a dry creek bed, slowly filling what had been empty. One evening she found a new shawl folded on the porch railing. Wool, deep blue, soft as a whisper. No note, no explanation. She put it around her shoulders when the night air turned cool and did not take it off until she went to bed. Mrs. Dorothea Prairie came back on a Tuesday, rode up to the fence where Lenora was working in the garden dirt on her knees and mugwort in her hands. She did not dismount, did not smile. She reached into her saddlebag and produced a small wooden box. Cedar old and smoothed the hinges tarnished green, held it out. Lenora stood, wiped her hands, took the box, opened it. Inside, nestled in faded cotton, were seeds, small and dark and dry. Lavender, Mrs. Prairie said. They were my mother's. She grew them every year until her hands would not let her anymore. They do well in this soil if you give them enough sun. She did not apologize, did not take back what she had said. But she held out a box of her dead mother's lavender seeds to a woman she had judged and underestimated, and that was its own kind of language. Imperfect, incomplete, but real. Thank you. Mrs. Prairie nodded once, turned her horse, rode away without looking back. Lenora planted the lavender that afternoon. Gave it the sunniest corner of the garden, where the south-facing wall of the kitchen reflected warmth back into the soil even after the sun had moved on. She dug each hole with her bare hands, feeling the cool earth push up under her fingernails, the same earth that grew sage and buffalo grass, and all the wild things that had been here long before any fence or house or human dream had marked this land. She placed each seed with the care of someone who understood that small things carry the weight of the people who tended them before. These seeds had passed through Mrs. Prairie's mother's hands, had been planted and harvested and saved and planted again year after year, a cycle of growing that connected one generation to the next like links in a chain made of roots and rain and patience. When she finished, she sat back on her heels and looked at the garden. Mugwort and yarrow from the creek bank where she had first taught a wounded stranger the names of healing things. Dock and chamomile from the canyon where she had found a man she did not know and chose to save him anyway. Wild mint from the flat rocks where they had sat together in the golden light and she had told him about her mother. And now lavender from a woman who had judged her, and then in her own stiff and imperfect way opened a door. Every plant in this garden was a story. Every root was a memory. And together they made something that looked from a distance like the beginning of a home. She watered it with creek water carried in the same copper pot she had used to brew yarrow tea in a leaking cabin that now felt like another lifetime. Evening came on soft. The sky turned colors that had no names in any language Lenora knew. She sat in the rocking chair on the porch, not behind a window, not behind a wall, out in the open where she could see the sky and feel the breeze and smell the sage. Silas came out, sat down beside her in a straight-backed chair he had carried from the kitchen, close enough that if she reached out, she could have touched his hand. She did not reach. He did not move closer. The space between them was not empty. It was full of cornbread and canyon dust and yarrow tea and moonlight, and 47 words that turned out to be true. The first star appeared in the east, bright and steady. Lenora looked up at it, remembered her mother standing at the window of their tiny room in St. Louis teaching her the old rhyme, "Starlight, star bright." She did not say the words aloud, just smiled. A small smile, private, the kind that belongs to a memory so tender you keep it folded inside your chest, like a letter read so many times the paper has gone soft. The stars came out one by one, scattered across the darkness like seeds waiting to grow. The iron star on the gate was the last thing visible as the light faded. 5 points of black metal against deep blue sky. It had been there long before Lenora arrived, but tonight it looked different. Tonight it did not look like a brand or a claim or the mark of a man's empire. Tonight it looked like a place where somebody belonged. Dear friend, that is where I will leave them. 2 people on a porch in the gathering dark, not yet whole, not yet healed, but no longer alone. My grandmother used to say that the truest measure of a person shows itself when nobody is watching, when there is nothing to gain, when the only witness is your own conscience and the good Lord above. Lenora gave half her cornbread to a stranger she believed had nothing. Silas learned that the treasure he had been hunting for had nothing to do with land or cattle or money in a safe. Maybe that is what we are all looking for when you get right down to it. Somebody who sees us for who we really are and stays anyway. If you found something familiar in this story, something that reminded you of your own road toward trust and belonging, then these words did their work. Thank you kindly for walking this path with me.